I can't pronounce regular people's names, and I can't pronounce these made up words either. Hello and welcome to Entertaining the Idea, episode number 403. This is the podcast where we discuss the creative process from the perspectives of both generating and consuming content. I am joined by one half of my co-hosting team.
Hey, I'm Anthony
Hudax, and I am the other half of this duo, John McStravick, or better known as JMac. So, Tony.
Yay.
What's going on? What's happening? Anything new?
Nothing super crazy. We're officially moving out of Los Angeles County. We are going to be Ventura County people. So that's interesting. We're still within the 30-mile zone on the far side of it.
That's got to be just barely on the...
We are going to be down the street actually from the Big Sky movie ranch,
okay,
which famously... had the Little House on the Prairie, which that set burned down a while back in one of the fires. And then, tons of other, any like Western, any like thing where they shot a wide open plane, and some underwater stuff. Because I didn't realize they had a giant tank out there. So yeah, the Big Sky Studio Ranch is going to be our neighbor.
And isn't wasn't the Manson family ranch out that way too, I believe?
You know what?
The original one, not their desert hideout that they were talking about, but...
My wife said the exact same thing. She goes, is that where the Manson family was? And I was like, no, this is not where the Manson family was. The Manson family were down closer to like Calabasas. So we're going to be up in Simi Valley. They were down by Calabasas. And that ranch was called something else. It was like Sal's Ranch or something very basic.
Yeah, I know it was a different ranch, but I thought it was more closer up in the Simi Valley area, but yeah. I don't know for sure. And I will take your word for it. This is a little factoid that I trust that Anthony Hudax would know, so we'll go with it.
No, it's only because I looked it up.
But of course.
Because my wife said the same thing. She's like, oh... we're going to be by the Manson Ranch? And I was like, no, it's not the Manson Ranch. Spawn Ranch.
Yes, Spawn is where Ranch. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's in Los Angeles County. All the serial killers are in Los Angeles County or San Francisco in the Bay Area. But we're in Ventura County, where there are no serial killers.
You just step right over that county line, and they just stop. They don't even go there.
It's like those dogs that have the invisible shock collars, and they just like hit, like as soon as they get onto the 118, they just like freeze, and they're like, gotta go back, and they just like slowly turn, and like lightning flashes, and they're like, time to serial kill again.
Back to Los Angeles County.
That would be the best. I would hope I would do that if I was ever a serial killer. Like, as I'm getting ready, I just walk out the door and say, time to serial kill again.
I think that's what they all do. All right. Well, congratulations. That's it. That's exciting. It's a little further out, so I hope. Luckily, we still have this wonderful thing called the internet, and we can still record this podcast over the internet and see your wonderful face, whether you are in Glendale, California, or in Simi Valley, California. So, good luck with all that.
It'll be cool. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Some great hiking trails up there.
Yeah, we're gonna discover those.
Awesome.
I haven't seen any yet, but I'm sure they're out there.
Well, the 118 will be your new home.
I know it will.
All right, well, let's move on here then, and let's get into our opening question of the week. And I was just curious, do you kind of track any aspect of your life, like with any sort of consistency? Is there anything that you kind of try to look at and kind of make data out of, so to speak? And if you do, like, what would you do with this data?
Okay, so this is kind of a funny question. So there's two answers to this. One, I use an app called Everyday, and it's an app that's just a basic habit forming thing, and it's a very simple grid, and you just tap on it each day, and I like to try and get my streaks going for as long as possible. So I have like exercising, meditating, writing, comedy, networking. Like there's a bunch of things that if I can like check each of my boxes for the day, that's good. But of recently, over the past 80 days actually, I've been part of this, like, let's call it a DIY spiritual retreat that I've been doing with a bunch of members of my wife's family. And it's like all of these asceticisms you have to do. So it's like you're not doing sugary drinks. You're not like you're going to prayer for like an hour a day. It's this really kind of intense program. I've been doing it for like 80 days now. Today is day 80. So that I'm tracking everything. So I'm keeping an eye on all that. And what I'm doing with that is just trying to get through it. So it's been a very interesting process. I was someone who was raised Catholic. This is a Catholic program, but have many issues with the church, not like dogmatically. So it was sort of a way to like refresh all that. So like I said, it's kind of like a 90-day DIY spiritual retreat. So it's been very interesting. It's a program called Exodus 90. So I've been doing that, and I don't know. So that's tracking a lot.
Nothing says spiritual enlightenment like DIY.
Yeah, right. That is the most Los Angeles way to describe any sort of spiritual enlightenment. Is like, yeah, it's sort of this like DIY thing. I get, a crystal and a prayer card, and I go off and do my thing.
I finished all my pottery, and I was like, well, what's the next thing I'm going to make? Well, I thought I'd remake my spiritual enlightenment.
I found it on Pinterest.
Yeah,
it was on this Pinterest page. It was great.
I'm really getting a lot of great things I'm going to post on my board. Just wait till I'm finished my 80-day challenge here. That's what Tony's collecting. He's not checking off that he's doing things. He's collecting all sorts of artifacts to take pictures of and post and give inspo to everybody else.
You can, as soon as my Pinterest comes out on this, you guys are going to be like, oh my gosh.
I don't know. We might not be able to keep Tony on the podcast anymore because he's just going to blow up with all his DIY spiritual revelations.
DIY spiritual retreat.
All right. Well, that's cool. I'll be honest. I was a little surprised you actually track as much. I thought this would be one of those things where you just kind of laugh at tracking things and doing your data and all that kind of stuff and seeing where you're at. I do some streak stuff.
No, I'm big into that. Yeah, I'm big into that. I'm one of those people that's like, I think comedy is a numbers game. So if I try and write 10 jokes a day, because I'm like, if I write 10 jokes a day, that's like, if one of them is good, then it goes on. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I remember we had those conversations before, and you did do the math for me, and I was like, that makes 1,000% sense, because you kept saying just 10 jokes a day, but you keep adding that up. All of a sudden, by the end of the year, you have what?
Yeah, something like that. If you're right, but you're just. Yeah.
But that's great. But that's tracking too, and that's keeping stats on all those kind of things, which is great. And I do some similar things. I do the writing, and that's more of a streak thing where I just check off the box each day that I did a writing. And I've talked about this before. The whole don't break the chain method, which for that kind of thing is great. Yeah, and you've asked before. I don't do a word count, and I've actually been thinking about it more lately of maybe looking into doing that, but. My writing style, I do a lot of like thinking and stuff and outlining and just writing random notes down. So and I also do it on paper a lot too. So kind of trying to track words is a little more difficult. But when I get back into actually, maybe punching out a script, I might maybe give myself a word count each day to try to keep myself honest.
Yeah, I never understood how word count worked when you went into like editing. So like if say you want to do like 5,000 words a day, if that's even reasonable, I'm not even sure how much that is.
So I think that's like getting up in the Stephen King level there, maybe.
Is it? Okay. All right. So maybe you want to do 400 words a day. I don't know. So you do like 500 words a day. So what happens like if you edit? Like does that count as like? Are you just like changing your word count? Like if you edit 500 words out of the day, or if like you write 1,000?
Yeah. I have the same thoughts. That's where it's like, if you're not actually doing the actual writing, like the full draft, your kind of first draft, like how do you kind of grok that with saying, well, how do you keep up with this, whatever it is, 500,000 words a day? If you're just rewriting and half of it is you're kind of deleting a word, putting a word back in. No, that word doesn't work. Let me delete that and put it back in. Or you're rearranging words, and you're like, how do you kind of? So I don't know. That I've never really looked into doing a word count, but I am interested in it just for certain practices of just keeping yourself kind of focused and pushing yourself towards a goal. But again, it doesn't apply to all circumstances. So maybe I'll look into it more, and I'll report back, and I'll follow up, as they say. Some of the other things that I track, I do a lot. I do certain metrics, kind of just as like physical metrics. Like track how much daily water I drink. I always have a goal of drinking a gallon of water a day. And so I do that in ounces, and I track that by having a water bottle I know is 20 ounces, and then any pint glass is 16. So I just have like an app on my phone that I just either tap 16 or 20 when I finish it, and I try to get to my ounce goal a day, which is like 128.
What made you do that? Like, when did you, like, why were you like a gallon a day? How did that happen?
Well, there's always this thing about, you'll probably see those articles. I'm sure you could search online and find hundreds of them of like, there's this idea of drinking a gallon a day, I guess, is like the optimum amount of, because is it 8 times 8? That would be 64. Because I think you're supposed to, what is the recommended general myth is like 8 ounces. I think it's eight ounces of water a day. So that'd be 64 ounces would be like your cups of water a day.
8 ounce one.
I think is supposed to be like this rule of thumb that you're supposed to do. But there's articles about how if you drink a gallon a day, like it's about like what does water do to you if you don't drink anything else, but you mostly just drink water, and how water is beneficial for you because it helps you clear, you think clearer, you don't get headaches, you're not as tired, your skin looks better. So it has all these benefits. So I decided to see, well, can I drink a gallon of water in a month? I think I started, and I got to doing that, and it felt pretty good. And you do see some benefits of it and some changes that happen if you do kind of reach that goal. So I just started making that kind of my daily goal to do. And I kind of just been doing it probably for like 3 years now.
Wow.
And yeah. And I used to drink even more than that at times, but mostly now I usually hit around the 128. Sometimes it might be a few ounces less. Sometimes it's a few ounces more. But you know, I've kind of settled in there pretty well. It helps kind of, it really does. Like I feel good throughout the day. I'm hoping it's good for my skin long-term, that kind of stuff. Like I don't feel, you know, there's kind of benefits, especially because I train a lot. That also helps there in those parts of life where I'm always just hydrated. So yeah, that's definitely one of my daily things that I do. And it's just a habit I've formed over the past several years. So The other ones are, I do my running mileage, and I think you do too. I've got an app that always tracks all my runs. That's one of the big things. And I think I talked about it before. There's this app called Tempo that actually parses out all the data that you kind of collect from your runs and the apps that you do to even more quantify different things of cadence or how much your heartbeat, where your heart rate is. There's different ranges and how far you're pushing yourself, how many steps that you're taking, and a whole bunch of other statistics that you can track. And it's not like I'm looking at them every day, but when I want to know where I'm kind of at, it's a good thing to look. And then if I want to change something or push myself, I get to kind of see the variances that happen when I am consciously doing something different. And that's kind of like, I'd say the theme for me is that the reason I do all of these is because I like a quantified life, and taking different aspects of my life and actually seeing like a number put to it. And all the things that I track is just by general consumer stuff. Like I track through my watch mostly, like my intake, my mileage. When I run, I use my watch. I track my weight, but it's just a regular bathroom scale. I do a blood pressure, but same thing. It's just kind of off the shelf blood pressure machine.
Oh, I do track my weight too. Yeah, we got one of those smart scales.
Okay, and how is that? So it tells
you like, I like it because it's kind of like simple in that it's like, here's your weight, here's your body fat, here's your muscle percentage,
muscle mass,
and then here's your BMI, and then the amount of water you have and whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess I do that like most days.
Yeah, so I find all that fascinating. I'll just get a few metrics to measure my day. But that stuff's cool. I don't know. I just kind of have fun with it on one end, but then I also like to have it because I'm pretty much set in general routines, and so I have everything kind of quantified that way. And then if I'm conscious about something that I want to change or do something different, then I actually can see what that change does, either be with kind of some physical part of my life or even with writing and things like that. There's different ways. Oh, because I also do my time tracking, where I have different parts of my day that I'll track. Be it I'll track how much time I'm writing, how much time I'm focusing on different projects, be it like if I'm editing a video or writing an article, things like that. And so same thing, that's something that actually helps to kind of know where my focus is at and, re-engage different ways and try to improve myself. So those are a lot of the different things. And the other thing I do too, I track, like I've been doing this now for 3 years, like what movies I watch. I track all the movies I watch. Every time I watch a movie, I put it in a spreadsheet. I say quick thoughts, and kind of give it a star rating of 1 to 5 stars of what I thought about it. So, and if I watched it at home or in a theater, and it's been all at home for the past 2 years. So I'm hoping to get that first theater check mark in there soon.
Yeah, I can't do that. I tried to do the time thing once, and I was like, this is so annoying. I can't, like, there was a thing that our work made us do. I was working for an advertising company, and you had to switch every time you went to a different client, and I was the worst at it. Like, it was just, I would just be like, okay, I'm going to go do it. And you would, like, I mean, it would be like you have to, like, clock in and clock out, essentially, of this program. But it wasn't even, like, super difficult. It was just, like, click, like, onto this client, like, start, and it would just track the time that you were doing it. And that was, I couldn't stand that. I don't know why, but it would be a good thing to know. It's like, how much time am I spending?
Yeah, it's a mental model that you have to adopt.
Right.
It's just a habit. It's nothing, you know, and it has to fit how you do things. But that's one of the hardest parts of time tracking is just remembering to do it. And I've just been able to sort of force myself into doing it. I think probably in the beginning, though, I wasn't as consistent with it, but I just kept doing it. And I think I started small and like, okay, let's just track, say, all the time that I'm writing a script. And then it's like, okay, all the time that I'm writing an article. And then all the time maybe I'm editing a video. And then you kind of just keep pushing out from there. And I kind of blur the lines between some like what I call like professional things that I'm doing, and then like some of the personal stuff. Like I might track just how much time I'm doing small admin stuff, just so I get an idea of like how much time am I putting into like triaging email or writing in my journal or things like that, just so that it's like you kind of can understand where some of your day's going, so you can balance it out if you're putting too much time in like one area where you really want to focus it on some other aspect that you find more priority, stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess that, I mean, that all seems like actually a really reasonable thing to do, because you really can't try and change something unless you know where you're starting from. And I have noticed, like I said, doing this like 90-day thing, it is interesting how quickly something becomes a habit if you're motivated to do it. Like this thing about like not having sugary drinks. So basically I drink Topo Chico and black coffee, and like at first it was terrible, and then after a while it's like, oh, well, that's what I drink. Like, it's just, it becomes such a different thing. And once it becomes a habit, you don't even think about it. Like, you don't think about doing something else. You're just like, oh, this is what I'm doing. And there's days that you're allowed to have alcohol and stuff like that. So I definitely take advantage of those days as well. But it's, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting. This has taught me how quickly something can become a habit if you're motivated to do
absolutely.
that. So maybe time tracking's my new thing.
Maybe. Yeah. And I think all these things, tracking anything, it just has to become a habit, and you just got to work at it. Cool. And I'm interested in hearing how your spiritual enlightenment goes, because it sounds like they're the same thing, trying to form some new habits, or at least make you aware of a lot of stuff that you're doing on kind of your daily routine that you don't typically think about, which is what a lot of these tracking things do. They try to make you aware of your habits. So let's move into our next section then. Let's get into what you've been watching. So Tony, what is up on your slate here?
I don't know if I talked about this before. Maybe I did. So we're going back through all the classic sitcoms, because my daughter is now at the age where she can watch sitcoms. So we've gone through Friends. We've gone through How I Met Your Mother. And now we're doing The Office. And I do have to say, The Office really holds up.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
It holds up really, really well. I was surprised. The first season plus a couple episodes, it's kind of rough.
Well, it's funny about these kind of things. You can tell when they're still finding their footing a little bit as well, like stylistically, their voice of the show, that kind of stuff, and all the actors still trying to find the voice of their own characters and stuff like that. And that's definitely true for The Office. It took them a little bit longer than some shows do to find their feet, but once they did, it was off to the races.
Yeah, once they really got into it, and once they really, really got the timing down of the awkward humor, which it felt like, this is something that I noticed. It felt like in the beginning the timing was off. Like the pauses in the awkwardness were too long. And it was kind of like killing the joke a little bit, or didn't feel like it had a rhythm to it. And then by the time, I think we're in like the third season now, which is when I really think it hits its stride, they really have the awkwardness down. Like that rhythm is really like built in there, and they hold those, you know, moments just a perfect amount of time. So I would recommend revisiting The Office. I mean, as all the memes have been telling you for years, Office holds up.
We rewatched it, I think maybe 2 years ago. I think when my son was first born, and you know, where you just have a lot of couch time because you're just pretty much nursing the kid, and there's nothing else going on. And yes, and so they fall asleep on you, all this. So we kind of went through it, and it was so great. And you're so right; it just holds up so surprisingly well. And even anything that's dated, it's almost part of the charm of the show, be it like the iPod swap at Christmas, the Yankee swap, that like, but it doesn't matter. And it still just holds up. And even though it's an video iPod from 15 years ago, it's still just really, really funny. And it's great. And it's funny you bring that up about the early parts, because I think the first season was actually only like 6 episodes. It was sort of like a mid-season replacement type of thing. But you can almost tell they had a different thought of what the show was going to be at first. And then they sort of, you know, focused in on something they were discovering as they kept working through it, it felt like. And it wasn't completely different. It was just kind of a tweak in sort of a little bit of how the tone or the voice was. And I think that's part of the actors finding, like you said, their comic timing. Because at first, I think you can almost see Michael as a creep in the very beginning. And not that hindsight, you know, his behavior is terrible, but in the show, they find a way to make him charming, and it all of like the bad behavior worked in the way that satire is supposed to work. And I think that's part of what you're talking about.
That is one of the things that I really forgot about it, how much this is a satire of a guy trying to be essentially like politically correct in the worst possible way. And it's funny because I've heard people say like, oh, you can never do The Office today. And I was like, you can absolutely do The Office today. Like that humor could work just as well today as it did back then. And even the stuff that didn't work, or like that worked back then, still work. Like we just went through the, where Michael outs Oscar, that episode, which I think is like one of the classics.
Yeah.
And like, you know, we were like squirming on the couch, but like giggling because he makes everything so much worse. And it's just like, it's like, how could we make it worse? And everybody like, but Steve Carell is so good, and they write the character so well that he has this heart that you just see on his sleeve, that he's not trying to be mean. He's trying to be in the right, but he's so just childish about it. I don't know. Like it's hard to explain.
Well, because at the heart of it, he just wants to be beloved and be the most popular person around and have everybody like him. But he tries so hard to do that he then puts his foot in his mouth all the time. And that's just like who Michael is. But that's, I think, the earnestness of him just wanting to be liked and loved by everybody. And however that manifests itself in his own head, but that's like the crux of him. But that's what makes everything so funny, because then he's so naive on many, many parts. But that's what it is. It's a satire on all those kind of taboos and stuff like that are in society or were in society, and it still works today. And it's, I agree. I've heard a few of that exact thing of, oh, you couldn't do The Office today, and the other shows that are in the similar vein. And I'm like, yes, you could, because it's not about the context necessarily. It's about the larger picture of what they're doing.
It's about trying to be seen as like a good guy, and like it not working because you don't quite understand what you're doing to be a good guy. But the other thing is that really helps is all of the other people who are your main characters are good people who are trying, like, who have that natural instinct of like, they don't want him to feel bad. Like, because they could all revolt against him. But like, there's the episode where, you know, Michael tells Jim's secret about like Pam, and like Michael's basically crying in his office, and you know, Jim would have every reason in the world, you know, to go after him, and like, but then Jim ends up comforting him, because like you get the sense that they're all like all the characters are drawn to be nice people. Like even Oscar in the like Michael outing Oscar, at the end Oscar ends up comforting Michael because Michael's so upset about like what he's doing, and it's just really, it's really good. They really like those secondary characters, you know, really like elevate the show so much.
It's an iconic show, and it still is and holds up. And
Yeah.
I love this idea that you're going through all these sitcoms with Lily. I've been hearing about this with that generation and a little bit older in the teens as well. Our Friends is one of the most popular shows among that kind of generation right now because they're just reliving it for various reasons. But I think it's cool that you're able to kind of redo that too. I haven't gotten into Friends yet. We did Office and we did Parks and Rec, and they both held up very well.
Oh, Parks and Rec will probably be another one that we do.
It's great. That was actually the first time I ever saw it though, and I loved it. And we talked about this on the show before, so. Okay. Well, that's cool. All right. Do you have anything else, or is that your kind of main?
I'll just do one.
All right. Well, I'll do two, but I think I can make them both quick. Yeah. So the first one I just watched was Being the Ricardos. This is the
Aaron Sorkin one.
The Aaron Sorkin show movie about Lucy and Desi Arnaz of I Love Lucy fame. I gotta say, so this is on Amazon Prime. It stars Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem in the title roles of Lucy and Desi Arnaz. They were just fantastic. I really just enjoyed the movie. It was just one of those types of movies that ended up just being really good and fun to watch. I'm always a sucker for a industry show, be it present day or historical. And I always love that. So the basic concept is that it follows a 1 week taping of the show from them in the beginning doing the table read all the way through the taping on Friday. But it happened during one of the most tumultuous weeks of the show. I think it was in 1953, I believe, when something like that, yeah. When it came out that there was a news story that Lucy was a communist because she checked a communist yes on a communist card sometime in her past, and then also there was a lot of news stories coming out about Desi Arnaz cheating on Lucy and going out at night and those type of gossip that was going around. I can't remember. I think I read about it. I'm not sure if these are all actually happening at the same time or if they kind of made that as a construct and a conceit of the show, the movie, just to put them together to kind of show the relationship, the dynamic that was going on. But either way, they played it to great effect, whether it was actually happening as this all at the same time or if they kind of meld them together for the movie itself. And then they also had flashbacks about the courtship between the two and also kind of Lucy's rise from a B player at RKO Studio to the I Love Lucy show. So again, they just did everything really well. It has a lot of Sorkinisms in there. There's a lot of quick banter back and forth where I'm like, is this really how Lucy speaks? But, you know, sometimes it's fun. Other times it can be a little wearing on you. Sorkin can, but that's Sorkin for you. He also directed it, so he really got to pump in his style and tone through up and down throughout this movie. But all that said, I've seen other Sorkin ones that he's done, directed as well, and this is one of his strongest ones so far. So really good, and I really recommend it. It's just a really good, really great show to watch. Really great movie to watch.
Yeah, the only thing I had a problem with this about was everybody was very clever and everybody was very... What I didn't like was that Lucy was rarely funny. And that was the thing that actually kind of got me. And I didn't know if, like... And maybe in her real life she was not funny at all off, like, camera. But she came up as very intelligent because Sorkin can write very intelligent very well, normally he does humor fairly well, like
his sly quippy humor.
Yeah, there were so many times I was like, ooh, I remember walking out of it and thinking that was an interesting take to do the story of Lucy without making her funny. I was like, that's a big swing. Obviously not the focus of the show. However, you have all these beautiful mind moments where she's obsessed with getting these jokes right. And like she's just sitting there like rehashing and rehashing and rehashing something to get it right. and you're like, oh, okay, that, you know, like you see Lucy the tactician. You don't. The only thing missing for me is I did not see Lucy the funny person. You know what I mean?
Right. Outside of that, outside of her focusing on these bits within the show itself, like when she's with either Desi or with any of the other supporting characters, like somewhere else outside of the scope of the show. Yeah, I agree. There was never, or in those flashbacks, there was never that much of showing her having that sly, witty side to her. So
yeah, it was interesting. Yeah,
this is not the character I envisioned Lucy being. Now, I don't know if maybe she was very strong-willed behind the scenes and very articulate and smart, and that's fine. But there was something missing. I was thrown off a little bit by the way they designed the character. Or he designed the character a bit.
Yeah, I heard that she was all those things, yeah.
He was really trying to force home that she's a smart, intelligent person, but then forgot to add in some other layers to her that actually made Lucy who Lucy was.
I think that's probably the best way to put it. It got way too focused on being like, hey, remember she's smart and she's strong and she's driven. It's like, got all that. As a comedian, though, where's that part of her? And I think that's, you know, probably a very hard, you know, thing to do. He's Aaron Sorkin and I'm not, but I'm just like, that's something that I was missing in that movie.
I think he funneled most of his humor through the J.K. Simmons character. I think that's he got the best lines, which is probably why he ended up getting nominated, because he really did have the best quips and like the best just dry humor out of anybody in the whole movie.
And Javier Bardem did a really nice job too. He came off way more charming than I've seen him in a lot of other things. Like I always think of him as having this like creepy psychopathic side. Yeah. And it was like almost non-existent in this.
No, he was the most charming of all. He was probably my favorite through the whole movie. Like, I really was I just felt so much empathy for that character, especially at the very end. That the ending was really, really great to kind of punch that home, because I'm sitting there and he's going through his whole thing that, you know, we won't do any spoilers here with the audience. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty stunning. Like, this guy really does love his wife. But then the turn comes, and it was pretty devastating, I think, just because he hit it home so well and really felt for him in the moment right before the very end. So we'll leave it at that. But I agree. I was just, Nicole Kidman was good, but again, I think maybe that character part of it was lacking. But for him, I think he nailed everything about who, at least I imagined, he was in real life. I just was jealous. I was like, man, this guy seems like the coolest guy in the world. How do you be this guy? That was like how I thought about him. So.
And I thought that was like, and that apparently was like the charm of Ricky Ricardo, is that he was just very like charming and suave, and people like gravitated towards him. Like that is an uphill battle during that time, and like people just really enjoyed it. He was able to like play that. But I had heard the same thing about Lucy, that she had this amazing charisma, and while she was tough, like was also like people were drawn to her. Yeah, and that was what I was kind of missing. And
that makes sense.
But I will say that Nicole Kidman did a very good vocally like Lucy impression. I thought she did a really nice job that way.
There was an interview by both of them that they talked about how they didn't want to do the role, where they weren't as familiar with I Love Lucy somehow, some way growing up. And when they decided to do the role, they're like, okay, because it was Sorkin, he wanted them to do it. But then once they found out the cultural significance of the show and these two characters and these people, not just the characters, they got supposedly scared off and were talked to Sorkin about bailing out, and he somehow talked them staying in because they thought it was too heavy of a responsibility to do the role, but they ended up nailing it and knocking it out the park. So if I can find it, I'll include it in the show notes. So the next show that I watched, and I just finished it the other night. That's why I just want to talk about it, which I ended up loving the show. I ended up finishing Peacemaker. This was the Suicide Squad DC Universe spinoff on HBO Max, starring John Cena as the titular Peacemaker. Have you gotten a chance to see it?
I watched one half of the first episode, and I have not.
Okay, and did you not continue because you didn't like it, or you just one of those time constraints?
I fell asleep because it was late, and if I start anything after 10 o'clock at night and I am not immediately invested in it, I fall asleep. I have a feeling that probably the first episode is a slow burn into like some sort of like thing at the end of it. I had to watch the opening sequence. That's what everybody talks about as like the highlight of the show.
Okay. It's really funny.
I've heard that's a highlight, and I heard John Cena playing the piano is a highlight.
Yeah, that was a good scene. Yeah. I absolutely love this show, and I think John Cena was perfectly cast for this character. It's just one of those things that, and I talked about this when I talked about the Suicide Squad, I think at our first episode of the season when we talked about the movies that we really enjoyed, and I said I enjoyed Suicide Squad 2, and James Gunn directed that, and he also created and wrote most of the episodes for Peacemaker, and this was his idea of the spinoff for this character. And he said once he saw John Cena, he thought he actually had great dramatic range, so that's where he wanted to actually make a show with him. Yeah. I just think John Cena, and I said he's hit or miss, but when he hits on a character, he's better at comedy almost than anything. Like, he just has amazing comedic timing, and just a sense about him, about certain characters that he plays. And Peacemaker, it combines this serious action hero with just this like goofy kind of frat bro kind of guy, and he melds them together just so seamlessly and so perfectly. I feel like, where you get the fun action, you get the jokey frat boy part of it, but the idea behind him too, where but that's the thing, is they kind of infuse this backstory, which I'm sure comes from the comics, of his upbringing with his dad is this like racist, KKK kind of type of member, and just the stuff with the family and the brother and all these kind of backstory elements that kind of led to where he is now. And they actually gave him this nice, really great arc that happened throughout the season, and kind of moves past just this, 1 or 2 dimensional character that is kind of in Suicide Squad, and really kind of infused a bunch of more layers to him and allowed him to kind of grow, which I just thought was great. And all the surrounding characters were great too, because they all come from the original, or from the Suicide Squad too as well. But there were secondary characters in there, and they bumped them all up to kind of being part of the main crew. And the basic idea behind the series goes, he gets kind of released to jail to get pulled into this ragtag group that's sort of like a Suicide Squad light on the side, and they have to stop some sort of alien bug race that kind of can inhibit humans, and they want to take over the world or something like that. So some bizarre, crazy, wacky kind of story, which James Gunn kind of really loves to lean into a lot. And they do have a lot of just crazy things happen throughout the season, but they really just make it fun and funny, and it plays into all these offbeat, odd comic book shows that I've been watching lately that I just really enjoy, be it the Doom Patrol or The Boys, and now Peacemaker's on that list of these just really odd and quirky and just really eccentric shows that just really ham it up a lot, but then also just have some really great action, but still then have a great story and narrative that goes along with the whole show. Yeah,
it's definitely one that I have to check out. I have to finish Doom Patrol first. We got sidetracked on a couple other things, but I'm in.
I get it, and it's hard too. And like, it's the funny part too is like, I don't know any of these comic book characters. I don't follow comic books as far as the actual comic book series themselves. I never knew of Peacemaker until I saw Suicide Squad 2, and now all of a sudden I'm a big fan of this random, probably third tier kind of character within the DC universe. But I just love it. It's almost more fun, I think, that way when they create these shows out of these characters that never had a big following, but now you can kind of infuse a whole ethos around them, and I think it's just great. It's really, really good. So Peacemaker on HBO Max, and yes, the title sequence is hilarious and just so random and out there, but it just fits in again with the show. Just really just sets the tone of kind of where they go with everything, even though it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the show. It just leans into the hammy part of the whole show and series.
Love it.
Let's move on then, Tony, into we're gonna do sort of a topic A, topic B for our main event a little bit here, and they kind of play off of each other. But the first part of it is going to be our therapy session. And as again, I'll be the one on the couch, and Tony will be giving me some good advice and encouragement along the way. I read this has to do with, I read this article, I read several about them, but there's this one specifically. I read about trauma and it being kind of a buzzword for a common story thread through shows and movies kind of over maybe the past half decade to 10 years. And a lot of it calling it as kind of a trend that's now overused and kind of becoming a trope. And they all kind of do a poor job of raising awareness or even giving a good commentary on the issue of trauma. These kind of articles are sort of catnip for me because I always enjoy reading about trends in story and writing and kind of what's being what is the kind of common zeitgeist right now of stories. And these kind of, I love these think pieces. I can't kind of get enough of them. The thing is, this kind of got in my head as I was rewriting a story, and I'm currently rewriting a story I picked up that I'm kind of dusting off part of my year of execution and kind of finishing this story. And I'm going through and looking back at kind of reviewing everything. I was looking at notes. You gave me some great notes on it, Tony. I was reviewing them, and now I'm doing the revamp of kind of the character design a bit and the overall kind of like theme and idea of like what the story is about and what are the wants and needs of kind of my three main characters in the movie. And I'm going through the main protagonist and I'm writing out her wants and then her needs. And as I'm writing it, I'm writing out something that has to do with like her need is to face this traumatic experience. And as I'm saying, I wrote down like this traumatic experience. I'm like, fuck. Because all I instantly bells go off my head. I think back to this article and I'm like, oh no, I have this like mini existential crisis. Am I doing this trope of this trauma bit? Am I just doing this subconsciously and it's just this easy thing? Is everything terrible? Am I awful? What am I doing? Am I wasting my time on this story? I'm having all these like this, self-awareness happening. And it felt like all of a sudden I just went from really feeling like in a flow to just feeling terrible and questioning everything that I was doing. So my question comes, what is the right amount of kind of critical commentary of like the art and the business that you're in and the skills set that you're working in, and like reading articles about this and trying to stay up and understand what is current and what is maybe kind of overplayed in what you're doing versus keeping all that out so that you don't have this inner critic or you don't have a little bird chirping in your ear and being judgmental while you're in that kind of more vulnerable open state of creating your story. Where do you kind of lean? How do you kind of in work through all these kind of issues with this kind of stuff?
Yeah. I think I get where you're coming from. So where I come from, I start from a basis of this. Critics and cultural critics and anybody like that is paid, as all writers are, to fill pages and to fill time. So having a unique take on something or having a take that will make somebody go, oh, wait, what is that talking about, is going to be something that'll get you eyeballs. So an article that will get a lot of people's eyeballs are the characters from Ted Lasso too happy to be worthwhile? And it's like, well, wait a minute. Now all I have to do is try and justify that point. I don't have to believe that point. I just have to justify that point. And I can say, oh, well, because of this and that and whatever. So I always kind of take any type of cultural commentary with a grain of salt and being like, well, you're just paid to write something. Like you got a deadline to fill. So, but then there are the ones that sort of like resonate. And those are, I think they're okay to just kind of like keep in the back of your head and just be like, oh yeah, I guess that's a new trope that's coming up. I don't think I would have realized the trope of starting a story with, something happening and then like flashing back to like 6 months earlier or 1 year earlier or 3 weeks, and until somebody broke it down. And I think it was Craig Mazin on Script Notes had broken it down of being like, and maybe John August as well, of just being like, this is everything now. This is like this cheap way to say, my story will get interesting, just stick with it, but it's not going to be interesting yet, instead of having something that naturally does it. And I'm like, oh yeah. And that's cultural commentary that I think is worthwhile to be like, oh yeah, that's a thing. But I think the biggest guide right now is just, the biggest thing is authenticity. You don't have to authentically have to experience trauma, but you need to authentically be able to express that. And I think that's the thing, because I think the idea of like having a damaged and traumatized character is not new in cinema at all. I mean, how how many, like, what was it, like, Lethal Weapon that, like, basically Riggs gets up in the morning and, like, cracks a beer and tries to shoot himself, like, and then goes to work. Like we have these characters that it's almost like a trope in and of itself to have a character, or especially detectives that are dealing with this traumatic event in their life and having no way to do it. And the only way they're going to be able to do it is this case. And once this case gets solved, then becomes the inauthentic, well, everything's okay. And now it feels like when a case gets solved, it's like, okay, well, things are like 25% better. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And I think that feels like a more realistic part of life. Like, where people are like, oh, it's not going to be it's not the end of the world. It's like Jesse Pinkman driving away at the end of Breaking Bad, and he's completely messed up. And, like, you get this sense that his life is never going to be anything good. But at least he's safe now. And he's getting away. And, like, that's sort of, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't watched a series that ended, like, 8 years ago now.
I'm not even going to put in the spoiler warning horn. Like, yes, if you haven't seen Breaking Bad at this point and you're listening to this show, I mean, that doesn't seem like it would really sync up well, but I'm sorry for the one person who may have in that Venn diagram of listening to this podcast, but has not seen like, Breaking Bad.
They're like in season 3 and they're like, wait, what?
I've been living in a rock.
But yeah, that's sort of my big takeaway. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And it's like, and the thing is, it's, you know, I'm looking at more general too. So like, yes, like the trauma part, but this was just an example of like an article that kind of stuck with me as far as this idea. But it's and it could be kind of anything. And it's almost like you said, like the Ted Lasso is a good example of like, well, are they too happy? Or, you know, do these characters exist? And it's just like, well, and honestly, I'm glad you brought that up because I remember seeing think pieces about Ted Lasso and how like truthful his happiness is, or how much you could actually apply that. Or somebody who wrote an article with season 2 and the way, you know, we talked about a little bit the other episode with Ted Lasso being a little bit different. They changed up a lot of what they did in season 2, and it was less about the happiness. It was almost questioning that unquestionable happiness or positivity. Yeah. And I remember an article about like, oh, I'm feeling so much better because they actually called it out that you can't have just unlimited positivity. It was like some sort of, you know, paraphrasing what an article was about, analyzing the Ted Lasso season 2. And it's just, I was like, just that take, that reading the headline, whatever it was, just like exhausted me just thinking about it. And
the ones that got me were the ones that were like, Ted Lasso, positive humor is the savior of the future. And it was just like essentially like all sitcoms that aren't doing positive humor are going to be off the air soon. And it's like, okay, like I like the show too, but let's not lump everything in here.
Yeah, but that's why I feel like, and you kind of touched on it too, there is like differences, and you know, you kind of have a shit meter where you kind of will see a article headline or even then like the byline of like what it's kind of about, and you can kind of, after a long time now of reading a lot of different articles online, red flags can get raised for your personal taste of like, I'm not even going to bother because I don't want to hear that take, because it feels like kind of finding like you said, finding an idea and making it, or reverse engineering it back to make it to work. But you know, like this one was one of the ones that did stick with me. Like I said, and we were talking in the pre-show just a little bit, this author of the article, I've read her for a while. She's been at this site for a while. So I have a sense of her voice and her perspective. So I at least have a bellwether of where it's coming from. It was just so, and generally speaking, she has a pretty decent and pragmatic way of looking at things and trying to look at stuff through a different scope. So that's probably why this one sat with me a little bit. And like you said, there are articles that will do that, and it just depends. But it's just that idea of, should you stop reading these while you're kind of in the middle of working on something so you don't get influenced? Because it's just a hard thing, because it's the other side of it is you want to stay up a little bit and just at least understand what is some of the chatter, even if you don't agree with the chatter. And that's why I think you and I will get a little bit more into this actual topic that this article was about in our next section. But you know, it's just, I guess, you know, as many things are, finding a balance. But for me, what happened was, so then pretty much what happened was I kind of had this whole sort of like mini panic attack about this and questioning all these things. So then I kind of settled down a little bit. It didn't where I wasn't able to kind of shake it. So I think I just kind of maybe stopped for the night of writing once I kind of went through that. But I thought about it more and I was like, let's not let it influence you. I kind of rethought about where my scope was and where I was rethinking everything. I think that it's still true to itself. And I felt like what I've been doing and where I was going even before it's true. And it's not just some random thing that I'm just picking to make the conflict. Like I picked something else was the conflict, and this just sort of organically, I almost stated it myself, but without like kind of consciously saying, yes, I want to make a show about trauma and how traumatized this character was. It was just that I gave this character a backstory, and it ends up being an event that has had an effect into the current story that I'm telling, where I'm picking it up at. Yeah. So I'm hopeful, and and I also just figure, what, I have to just continue on with what I think is right and what I'm doing. And if I feel still pretty confident, I was confident before I got down in that spiral, just move forward, keep working on the story, do what you think it is. And you know what, I'm still committed to it. And in the end, if it never doesn't work, then I'll know that, and I'll take that as a lesson that, kind of maybe reevaluate if something like this happens again. But I'm kind of just going to move forward, and I'm trusting in my instincts and what I'm doing already.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And the other thing is, the only time I feel that way is I feel like I'm being disingenuous, maybe because I don't know enough about something. So a lot of times just researching it, if you're like just picking like something out of a hat, like you have parents who, like, both parents died in a car accident, and you have a character who that's happened to their parents, and then they're trying to move forward. I mean, we live in the age where like everything is at your fingertips. Like you can literally just go and click on videos of people who have had that experience and listen to their stories and listen to the way they express what they're feeling. And I think learning more about that, and and also using a bit of your empathy and imagination to put yourself in the same situation. It's like, what would I feel differently about? Like, and I think those are the type of things that pay off in the long run. There's a reason that they have cultural consultants on movies, and there's and dealing with different things, is because you really do need someone that you can like turn to and be like, hey, is this being authentic to what would happen because of this or because of that or because of whatever? Because we're so media saturated now that like I was saying earlier, like you can't have somebody solve a case and that fix the trauma of their wife dying. Like, that's not how that works. And everybody is so savvy to that now. So now it's like, yeah, okay, how does that really manifest? And how does it manifest in a way that makes it difficult for your character, which is what you really want to get to? Because, like,
right,
if, you set up early that your action hero parents died in a car accident, and then they never have to be in a car until like the one pivotal moment, and they balk for a minute. It's like, oh, well, I understand why, because, I mean, obviously people would call that out as being too hokey, but you know what I'm saying.
No, and you're just doing it for
that's the bad pitch.
Hypothetical example's sake. So I totally appreciate keeping it simple. Yeah. We're talking through some stuff. So I agree totally, and I think that's just where I've landed too. And that's part of it. I think for me, writing a story, and when you have something like this and there is a trauma within one of the characters and you're working around that and the effects of that, and trying to be authentic is kind of the biggest thing that I am trying to do. And that's constantly what I'm doing, trying to understand, like, well, if I was like, not even just me in these shoes, this person in this shoe, it's also, but that's all part of it. It's using your imagination. That's what we do. And I think part of it is continuing on what I was saying is just, I got to keep doing it. I got to feel like if I feel like my instincts are right overall, I'm being true to I think this character is and who I want this character to be. And part of this execution thing, though, is getting it to a finished state that then I'm comfortable to send it out and get feedback on it. And I'll get that feedback then. And if I'm getting a lot of call outs on certain areas around what we're talking about, like this idea of trauma, say, then I'll know that. And it's either I will work to fix it and find a remedy to it, or I'll just understand that maybe this isn't going to work. But I think that's part of is just getting to those next steps of sharing it out and getting that feedback as well. And maybe in some of those corners that would be able to speak more to this specific character and what she's going through.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's where I came at. So it's just literally while I was going through this rabbit hole, I was like, wow, I got to talk to Tony about this, because this is, I was having, like I said, like a existential moment, and I was like, wow, I'm freaking out. I need to talk about this. Like, what am I supposed to do here? And I was like, well, wait a minute. I've got a podcast. I can talk about it. This is great. I was like, perfect. This is an absolutely fantastic topic to talk about. So,
that's how it all works out.
All right. Well, all right. Perfect. So I think that's good. I feel a little better. I appreciate just the some of your insight there, Thanks. Tony, because it hit a lot of things that make a lot of sense for me. So I appreciate that.
Yay.
Always the great therapist. So if any of you have any questions for Tony to give you advice as far as your therapy session, please send them our way.
Terrible advice from Tony.
The link for the email will be in the show notes. Okay, or you can direct message us at Creative Diff on Twitter. So all the links to contact us will be in the show notes. Anyway, all right, moving on. We now are going to talk a little bit more in depth about what this actual article was, rather than the effect it had on me.
Right.
So there's kind of two articles that kind of play off each other by the same author. Is this Emily St. John?
Emily St. James. Yeah.
Emily St. James. So these two articles are by this author, Emily St. James, this writer for Vox, Vox.com. And she's one of their film critics. And the basic gist of these two articles, so the first one was the enduring effects of trauma, and how, like I said, pretty much that a lot of movies and shows have been using trauma as their kind of conflict within their characters, but they use it more, and it just become pretty much a trope, and they don't address it properly, and they don't really give good awareness or commentary on the issue. She wrote this other article called Legacyquel, as in legacy sequel-itis, sort of, is kind of, there was another name in there too. She went Legacyquel. There it is. I can't pronounce regular people's names, and I can't pronounce these made up words either.
Looking at that word, it's like my brain seizes, because I'm like, there's so many things hanging below the line. Like the G and the Y and the Q, I'm like and it just, you have to like really slow that word down. Legacyquel.
Yeah, because they don't actually take away any letters outside of like the first letter of sequel, and it's just usually you kind of have to find that common ground where you can mesh them, but they don't. They really just almost literally squeeze two words together and remove one consonant.
Oh, it's a hard one to look at. That is actually a disturbing word to look at.
I agree. And for some reason, she had there was two kind of terminologies that are kind of traveling around, and she actually likes that one better. And I can't remember. I'm trying to find if I can see the other. Oh, requel. Yeah, requel is the other one, which I find just much easier to kind of understand. And for whatever reason, she loves Legacyquel.
Yeah. Requel isn't good, but Legacyquel, once you start saying it a couple times, you're like, okay, it kind of like rolls.
I see how it does flow a little bit once you kind of grasp the phonetics of it.
But you can't look at the word. It's like looking at the sun. Even the two L's on either side, it looks like the whole thing's in brackets. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's a strange one. So have fun with that. It's kind of what is that that phobia when you tryptophobia, is that where you see all like the circles or patterns and it really freaks you out? I think it feels like that. You look at that word and you you get a phobia. It's like it's weird. Yeah. So sorry about that, about putting this into everybody's brain right now, and you're probably gonna go looking up this article and trying to find it, and you're just be like, ugh. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's a thing. Okay.
You can't.
So generally, the basic gist of this is that there's just now kind of never-ending stories of film franchises, and they just can constantly keep on going. And what is the effect that this is having on the characters themselves, talking about trauma, and kind of also the audience relationship with these characters who kind of never have a finality and an endpoint to their story. So I find this just fascinating, and I just kind of want to talk about it and get your kind of view on this idea of these these studios and these networks and these streaming services continuing to kind of dip into these franchises that are tried and true and people love, and they do keep coming back to them. There's a reason they keep getting made, is because people keep coming back to them out of either nostalgic sake, either this is just the story they're comfortable with, these are the characters they know. There's probably many more other reasons. So I guess my first thing is, I'm trying to think what is the best first question here. Do you buy into this problem of these never-ending stories, or are you a fan of this kind of continuing on of these legacy stories, say in a like Fast and the Furious franchise?
I think I kind of put it through the same metric that I do for many things, is that if it's good, I like it. Like when it works, and when it doesn't, it's got so much more going against it. Like it's so much easier to rag on it. Like it would have been very easy had, say, the Mad Max, the continuation of that story, not worked. That would have been very easy to been like, oh, well, yeah, you waited 40 years or whatever to make a like third installment or fourth installment of it. Like, of course it's going to be terrible. Meh. But like when it works, you're like, oh my gosh, that just expanded the world. To bring it back to The Office was able to expand its cast by having people that were really interesting and were really interesting characters. And then when they added to the original cast, and then you're like, oh, you just expanded this world in which everybody can like, and they did a very good job at bringing in new characters that were interesting. Having seen the Scream, this latest one, I don't think they were able to achieve that. Because you just didn't have, none of those characters that came in were incredibly interesting. And I was much more interested in the older characters, but maybe that's just me as somebody who watched the first Scream movie. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that was part of some of the ideas within the article, is this idea of especially a franchise like Scream, which is now coming up on probably like 16 years old, 17 years old, almost coming up on 20 years old. I think 1995 was the original one. But you're having two generations now. You're trying to bridge this gap, and the idea is there's only so far that the original cast and characters can take you, especially in a horror franchise where you kind of have to keep killing people off. At a certain point, you're going to be down to one or almost none of the originals. And now they're trying to fill in some new blood, so to speak. And they're hoping that those new characters and these new actors are good enough and big enough and will capture your imagination enough that'll continue to be able to do the franchise without all the originals. That's one dynamic of all of these things that are going on. I haven't seen Scream 5 yet, so I don't have a take on that. I did see The Matrix, so the article uses Scream 5 and The Matrix Revolutions as kind of its two comparisons and kind of examples to kind of work through this idea of this Legacyquel.
And I'll, full disclosure, have not seen The Matrix, so we're going to be in a very interesting place. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have. All right, well, good. Well, this is why we have two people on a podcast, because you do one thing and I do one thing. So it's perfect. This is like two halves of a brain coming together, Tony.
There we go.
As far as the Matrix 4 goes, I had mixed feelings on it, and it's that one. They are doing some similar things where they are bringing the old gang back together, but not all of them. And then they're trying to introduce some new characters who I would assume they might try to use to bridge to continue on the story, because that's part of the Matrix that they were sort of setting up, is that there's a lot more going on than just around the Neo character, that there is. And you also got that in the originals, that there isn't just Neo, he is the one, but there is a whole world that has been inhabited, and there's things going on and missions happening that aren't just centered around him. And this kind of correlates then to sometimes also the Star Wars, where same thing with the new trilogy. It's the same idea where they're trying to bring in the old and carried over and bridged to the new and the younger generation that they're bringing in. And it's that struggle that they're having. And same thing, they're having difficulty there. So all of them are struggling because they're all these original actors and characters are getting very old. Not very old, but they're all getting older. And either they're not going to want to keep doing it, or it's then getting to this next dynamic of it. These actual characters themselves, like how much story can you wring out of these same characters, and how much of these difficult situations and conflict can you put them through where they almost just become a caricature, or they don't really become relatable anymore because they go through so much trauma, as was part of this article, that they sense to have a sense of finality and being able to overcome these difficult events. And in the idea of Scream, Sydney Campbell, like how many times does she have to live through a killer coming after her and a copycat killer coming after her and trying to kill her? Like, what would that actually do to the psyche of an actual person? And then it's trying to have parts of that while also having a story that she's willing to do this time in and time out.
Well, it was interesting with Sydney because I remember it was the second Scream that she had essentially like left the world and was like out by herself on a suicide. Like she was doing she was like basically working as a suicide hotline operator, if I remember correctly. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, and you're just like, whoa. Like this,
because she was on like a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and she had like a fencing with a big security system and locks on all the doors and high tech stuff and cameras everywhere, like completely secluded, completely off the grid, outside of her own little, electrical and internet connected grid.
So, I mean, that to me reads like, yep, that's probably where I would end up if like a serial killer like had murdered all my friends in front of me, even if I like had killed them. That feels like where to end up, or I would end up in like some sort of like, I don't know, old folks home, or there's just people around.
You're just sitting in a rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, looking out the window.
Around people who are like, I know I would be faster than if a serial killer showed up. Yes, that would be me. So yeah, it is kind of interesting to see how far you could actually take like somebody like taking that mental beating. But at a certain point, it would feel like you end up getting that 1,000-yard stare where it just doesn't register anymore how traumatic this is. Like when you get into like some of the later, when you get into that last Scream movie, like you basically see like they've become, the people who have been in this for a while have become very desensitized to the violence that is happening, where they do, I mean, not a nice job, but they do a good job of having like the kids be much more like, holy crap. And then they're like, yeah, like that old James Franco from the Ballad of Buster Scruggs is like, first time. Like,
yeah, well, but I mean, then that just comes in the question of like, then how engaging is the show, the film ready? And it's like just you're wringing it all out. And I guess then that gets to these, deeper fan questions. If you're a big fan of a franchise, like, is this ruining a franchise as well? I don't know if she delves as much into that aspect of it, but that's kind of where I come from as far as these extending these franchises and these sequels out ad nauseum and just continuing to try to find and mine another story after a while, specifically with ones that had a nice, full, complete arc, and they were kind of conceived as a trilogy, and that was it. What is that doing to the franchise? Is it weakening it? Is it kind of tarnishing the legacy of it? And, I will say I sometimes don't. The way I look at that sometimes is that don't worry about the sequels or the reboots. Like, it doesn't tarnish the original. Like, it's still there. It still can mean whatever you want it to mean. But on the flip side, does it put a sour taste in your mouth for these ones that then, like, when you thought you had the finality, then there's this canon that continues on. You're like, no, I had my closure. I had the character had closure. I had closure. Like, it felt good. Yeah. Like, am I sad that I don't get to go on those adventures anymore with them? But just now resurrecting them from the dead or whatever. It's like, now I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're just going to do this all over again. And what kind of closure am I going to get from the story now?
Yeah, it's kind of like that double-edged sword. Like, you can tell when it's a money grab and that the time and the effort haven't been put in to make it something worthwhile. Where then you can also tell where like somebody had a really good idea about where to take the character. Like thinking of something like getting a little off the Trama, but more into the extended franchise. Thinking about something like Creed, like coming off the Rocky series. Point. Like you're gonna take Rocky. Rocky's gonna have his like thing, but now you have a whole new character with a whole different way of looking at things than Rocky did. Like you had a similar chip on the shoulder, so you could see how the two. But it was someone who really like thought about it and thought about who Rocky was and thought about what Apollo Creed's son would be like, and really like made a very interesting and a very compelling character to be like, okay, I can see how this world continues. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And I think with anything, if you try and like, it's kind of like with like if you do really offensive jokes, like you can joke about anything, but the more sensitive you get a subject, your margin of error goes really, really way far down. So, like, I believe you could tell a rape joke if you wanted to, but it's got to be, like, word perfect and intonation perfect. And your audience has to be all on the same page, because if you have one slip up, that becomes one of the worst jokes. But, like, if you thread it perfectly, it can be joked about. So that's the same thing of, like, these legacy, like, series that have gone on for, 3 films, and you're trying to do that 4th film. Like, your margin of error is so small because you'll get a little bit, like, it's not as small as a rape joke, but it's like, you'll get the nostalgia factor, but, like, people are going to be ultra critical, It's the difference between, like, the reboot of Ghostbusters and then the Ghostbusters Afterlife, where, like, people wanted a 3rd Ghostbusters movie. What they didn't want is the franchise to get rebooted. And I think that's where, like, they lost so much goodwill, because I think everybody just wanted it tied to the original somehow, and not to do, like, a whole other universe that we have to learn all over again and just grab the name. And I think, I don't know if that makes any sense, if that I may have gone too far out.
No. I actually, I think that makes a lot of sense. And specifically, the Creed one is a good kind of example, though, of taking a story and expanding it out. And I think that goes back to your point earlier about when you find a really good character and you find a good story for that character, that is what's interesting, though. And that's why Creed was so interesting, because you're taking it kind of this adjacent character and this adjacent story to a world that we do know. And you do bring in the main character from the other one, but he now is in a different type of role. So that's the thing, though, with the Rocky, at least he still has had his closure as far as, because they did do a Balboa movie, with Rocky Balboa. And that was, I don't know, they said that was kind of to make up for the number 5, to actually give real closure. So, and that was fine too. And again, like that's maybe one of the circumstances, again, an exception that proves the rule. But it at least then he had its closure in Rocky and Rocky Balboa. I think he actually did 2 modern day sequels. But yeah. More or less had his closure, and this wasn't now as much of Rocky's arc as fine, as far as it was a different type of arc for Rocky, and it was moving into this new role where he's trying to instill his advice and wisdom and stuff like that, as Mick did for him. So that's where I think why it worked so well, because you didn't have to re-put him through a lot of difficulty and conflict as much. Like he was part of maybe a little bit of the conflict for the main character. So, but a good example of really being able to be creative about expanding out a franchise, though, in a different way. Now, the Ghostbusters is a great counterexample of that, where I agree with you. It's like, I remember watching it and everything was just off about it, though. Everything, the characters, the tone, the style, like and that was where I got thrown off. I was just like, this has nothing of the original essence of the original franchise. That is where I was just like, I don't understand. And I thought they were supposed to kind of tie it into the original, and they didn't. And it was just all off. Like everything, just none of the check boxes were there, which actually is a great thing I want to bring up, because part of this article, they did talk about the expectations game when you're doing these franchises well, which I did think was a very succinct point, though, of when you're going into this, there's this really hard dichotomy of making it very original and making it fresh and making it new and making a new struggle for your characters and a good arc. But then you also have to hit on certain familiar expectations and almost like a checklist of like things that have been established happen in a movie of this franchise. And there's certain ones that you have to do. Scream's a great example of, you have to have an opening sequence where a killer calls some girl who's alone at a house or in some sort of situation that she's alone and is kind of becomes the prey. You have to have that opening sequence. Like, you can't have a Scream movie without it. If you do, you're not really making a Scream movie then at that point, more or less, and people will not be happy. But there's all those other things, and that's just one example, and she used it in this article. And I did find that as a very prescient point, though, that it's another aspect that you have to thread while weaving all these things together. And again, it just makes it very difficult. And the more you try to do it, the more you're just going to squeeze something in. You more, I think, after a while, you might just come up with some sort of bland, normal, generic way of trying to check that box, which then again is not continuing on with the theme of the franchise.
Yeah, and I think to bring it back to Ghostbusters, not to harp on this movie, but I think in talking about that, to framing it just in that expectations, I think what they were trying to do with that movie was to appeal to a younger audience. So the audience that would have seen, like the age of the audience that would have seen that original Ghostbusters and been enthralled by that was, around that, 13 to like 16, like that,
right.
Late, teen into like 20s type of person. And they were shooting, I believe, fully for that type of humor and the humor that would like hit that audience. So then for people who had watched the originals, that felt very childish in a lot of ways. It's like the Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars. That was trying to mimic the Ewoks, but much like there are people who saw the Ewoks that were older and were like, well, those are kind of stupid murder bears. Like, there were people who like looked at Jar Jar Binks and were like, that's annoying with a fairly racist accent for no reason. And I think that was just trying to appeal to like younger kids.
But that also comes back into this idea of maybe a checkbox where like, oh, well, we have to have some sort of like cuddly comic type of alien thing that does these little hijinks, but also is going to actually play into the story a little bit, which is where the Ewoks fall. But then again, you're going into this and totally kind of doing just a paint by number almost idea of what you think should be there. And that's where I think that's where a lot of these can go off the rails, and Jar Jar Binks is a great example of that. And
sure.
It's still a hard thing to do because you do have to paint, you have to do certain things, but then I think you can also get too tied to those ideas of like the checklist of like, well, we need this type of character, or we need this type of setting, or we need this type of scene.
If you're going to do that, you have to really focus on it and really be like, this is what we need.
Right.
We need to have this in order for this to work. So this has to be pitch perfect. This other thing has to be like, if you're going to do a Bond movie, you have to open with a chase sequence. That chase sequence has to be epic. Like, so you got to like focus a lot of attention on that one thing. And maybe that means like something else changes, but like if it's for the case of like a scene in the middle of like the second act that isn't going to make sense because of something that happened in the chase scene, well, that scene in the second act is gone. You got to make that chase scene like the biggest, the best, the wildest thing ever so that you get into that movie, and it's got to top the other ones.
I know. Well, and we're talking about like opening things. Another one I remember that got a lot of pushback, and I agree, was Indiana Jones, the fourth movie, was the Curse of the Kingdom Skull or whatever it was.
Oh, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, yes, or something like that, right? Curse of the Crystal.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So now, talk about like things that are they are written into the unauthorized or the what are unspoken scenes that have to happen. there has to be an opening scene where Indiana Jones is on the hunt for some sort of MacGuffin artifact, and this scene will end up having some sort of chase, and he'll get into some fisticuffs probably and be running away because he'll get nearly caught or something. But the big part of that is that it does not tie in at all to the rest of the story. It is a one-off sequence that has nothing to do with the rest of the actual story. It's not the inciting incident. It is just a fun adventure, a fun adventure scene that happens, and it just shows off Indiana Jones getting into all kinds of things that Indiana Jones does, and then that's it. And it's a rare thing, but it works, and it does, and it's just been his MO of all the other 3 Indiana Jones movies. And when they did that, the first scene of the Kingdom Skull actually tied into the story, and it was you saw the antagonists show up in the very beginning, and you saw them have some sort of plan, and it just throws you off. You're like, this is not how this typically goes, and it just feels weird.
There was a lot of other reasons that felt weird.
Well, very true, absolutely. I mean, Shia LaBeouf, making a Marlon Brando wild one impersonation was another odd.
Yeah, oh, that's right. I forgot about that. And swinging in the trees with the monkeys. Oh, but I just was remembering getting into the refrigerator and getting blown up by a nuclear bomb to start the movie. I mean, bold choice, right? Start the movie with a nuclear explosion? Bold choice.
So getting back, pulling this back a little bit. I think we're getting off track.
We are. We're way away from Trama.
So one of the things so the other thing is, do you actually think do you think closure is then overrated though? Do you think what I was talking about, and I think what this article is kind of lending a little bit to, is that these characters don't get closure, and then if the characters don't get closure, the audience doesn't get closure. Do you think that's overrated?
I actually disagreed with her in that point. I think nowadays, I had mentioned it earlier just to say that I don't think you need closure in the sense that now it's okay. I think you need closure in that this part is done, and your life gets 25% better. Maybe out of this closure, you see an avenue that things could get better. But this idea of closure and then everything's okay, or closure that wraps everything up, I think is kind of an antiquated way of viewing movies. So that was one of the times I actually very much disagreed. I don't think that them not getting closure doesn't mean the audience doesn't get closure. You know what I mean?
And I do know what you mean, and I am half with you, and then I'm half pushing against this. So the way I'm seeing it is, I agree with the idea of this older idea of closure, and goes back to sort of your Lethal Weapon idea or any kind of detective story where they're fighting some sort of demon and some sort of lingering trauma, as we say, and there's all of a sudden this certain case comes up, and it's just this perfect case, and once they actually do finally solve the case and solve the whatever it is, and that's what gives them their final closure. Now that thing that has been haunting them has gone away because they've solved this one case. I agree with that. That is an antiquated idea, and this thing that all of a sudden everything is good and everything is fine and everything will be fine is an old and outdated idea. Life continues on, and you will still continue to have struggles, and specifically whatever this big struggle was won't entirely go away. It'll just maybe get a little bit less intense. I totally agree with that. On the other side, I do think there is an idea of closure to a franchise and a longer arc that maybe you do it either as one movie or a sequence of maybe 3 movies or even 4 movies. I do think there is an arc that should be finalized and finished and kind of closed. And so in The Matrix, in the end, Neo dies. That is still closure though, but he's done, it's over. And now the machines they've relented, and they've allowed people, if they want to wake up, they can wake up. That to me is still closure. It doesn't mean that everything is finished and, better. And I rewatching it, I guess they could allude to it, makes it feel like maybe that is the closure, but I never taken it like that. The fact that your main character died, that's the closure that I think's over with, and this story is done. Not that there's stories not still going to be happening as far as the people that are going to get freed and woken up to the reality of what actual life is and their struggles, but this closure, this part of the story is done. And then they're pulling them back out, that kind of thing. If we're speaking to the Scream franchise, I feel like continuing on with Sydney getting more and more people keep trying to kill her. Like I almost reboot the series or somehow, find a way like the Creed way of doing it kind of adjacent to the original trilogy and find a way to invigorate with a new character in a new sense and then give it different. And then that way too, you could kind of give it a whole different spin, a whole different style. Like maybe you aren't tied to that opening sequence idea of like this prey, murderer over the phone kind of thing. So that would just be like a way, maybe one idea of like how the Scream thing of like giving, if you're that invested in Sydney Campbell, her closure and moving on from this. I think Star Wars tried to have a little bit of both worlds where they tried to do this, but they didn't quite go far enough, I felt, and they kept around too much of the legacy artifacts that then blurred the lines and made it unsatisfactory, I think, both for the original fans, like of the original franchise, and then anybody new they were trying to establish. I don't think they were able to kind of give them their own voice and their own agency as much as they hoped that they could. And I think when they tried to push that in the third film of the newest trilogy, that's where it was too late to kind of give them that agency. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of zoned out and were frustrated by it. I wasn't personally one of them. I actually enjoyed, that's where I loved it the most, is when they finally just gave these characters their own way. That was what I loved the most about it. But that's kind of how I take it. Like I said, I kind of go both ways, and I understand what you're talking about, but I also do like some sort of finality that doesn't mean it's over, but this story is over, and whatever new thing you start up is something different. Where now I know I'm kind of going on here. The Matrix does a little bit of both, where it calls out, it does a lot of meta stuff, and it's going to call out exactly all of this stuff. So you actually should go watch it, because it's a great, in a commentary way, it's great. Now, what they're doing with the characters in the story, I'm a little frustrated by, because then they're doing what they're kind of calling out. But again, it's supposedly all playing in. This author of these articles read a lot more into it, I guess, because she also goes through trauma and she's correlating her experience with what she's viewing. So I wasn't able to get that read from it as much, because I don't live this trauma, as deep. So I don't have that read on it as well, but more of just this idea of legacy and keep digging into the same well. And are things a ploy, like a money grab, or is this still an artistic forum to kind of express yourself? And it's like, it actually plays into a lot of those questions and ideas. I probably have to do more viewings to kind of really dig deeper into it. So it's interesting on one part. I find frustrating on another part, where it's re-pulling up these sort of some similar stories again. So that's where I'm again mixed on Matrix 4.
Yeah, I think my thing is, I think you can have different types of, I think every movie should end a story. Like, you should have a full ride with each movie. I don't like, essentially like sequels that you're going to have to like go, like you have to watch the first one and the second, like, and it actually, you don't understand the end of the story until you finish the third one. I think there should be that like wrapping up in each movie. So like that's where I'm kind of like, great. And then you can have like chapters where it's like, okay, well, these three kind of go together and put this, sort of big bad to bed. It took 3 movies to take them out. At the same time, I'm also like, you can keep doing a series as long as you want, but you really do have to, like, you can't just keep telling the same story over and over again. Like, I kind of am impressed that Star Wars was able to do the Death Star twice in that, and then I believe even like a third time. Like that, like they're like, well, we had an idea for a Death Star, and like that was But I mean, I get it in some ways, because can you imagine how long it took somebody to come up with the plans for a whole star, to like all the stuff? Like, you don't want to throw those blueprints away. You gotta try and build it again. No one's gonna come up with something
I love all that, and it makes me laugh, because as a growing up and having to watch that as a kid of a different generation than when Star Wars came out, and when I did originally see that, I thought the same. I'm like, wow, okay, so you had original one, you blew it all up, which is cool, and that was like big deal. And now you're just gonna say, nope, we got it again. Either it's a new one or we rebuilt the old one and we're still just fixing it up. I'm like, okay, sure. I mean, luckily they had enough other good story that kind of papered over just that conceit. But yeah, I did think that. That was kind of funny. I always thought that was funny, and it was never something I really heard anybody bring up that was a huge fan of the original franchise. That was never a lantern that they hung on. They just kind of ignore that whole idea. But yeah, but we're getting to Clark's territory here, discussing the semantics of how the Death Star was constructed and what happens to the contractors, and are they liable to be part of it, or are they kind of Anyway, so bringing it back around a little bit.
How many?
Yeah. I was just looking at a few movies that in the franchises that kind of are doing these things, and like obviously, and I remember we talked about this a little while ago, because I had this idea that it was talking about TV becoming kind of like at the same level of movies, and then movies actually not degrading into television, but becoming the same thing as television. And obviously, the comic book realm has really pushed films and franchises to do this, where it used to be just trilogies, and now they're going into kind of never-ending storytelling. But that's what comic books are, and obviously these movies, the MCU and the DCU are working on that. Obviously, Marvel does a better job overall of creating this bigger, wider universe and ever expanding, which I'm still wildly impressed by. But movies now becoming, and you just said it, chapters, almost like a book now, where it's less of these long arcs necessarily over a span of a few movies, and it's kind of like a never-ending book almost, where they're more of just chapters in the next story, where they have continuity, but they don't have necessarily wider arcs. Now, it depends on the type of story in the franchise. Like, I think Fast and the Furious is a perfect one that is fine to continue on. They don't have an overarching arc over all of the stories. They did in the original, maybe couple, they tried to, but then once they decided that they were going to go full on sort of superhero style version of Fast and the Furious, they just became almost chapters in a book, and they're better for it. And I'll agree with that. That franchise is better for it.
Yeah. Oh, I think so too. But yeah, it's interesting to like have the story that you want to tell and tell it and then be done with it. That's a hard thing. And it's a hard thing because especially when it's very successful.
Another example of this, which I think was a frustrating one for me, was the Jason Bourne films, where they had 3, and even though they never went in planning 3, they did enough. They had enough smart people working on the second 2 that they were able to kind of construct a good overall arc and retcon it in with the first one, and then make 2 more that fit a better overall arc that had a 3 film arc, and it was great. Look, that is one of my favorite film franchises, one of my most favorite film characters of all time, and there's nothing more that I would love to go on more adventures with Jason Bourne, but they came out with the 4th one, and I was all excited about it, and I was pumped, but the expectation games kind of caught me, and then it didn't quite hit, and I just thought with the pedigree of Damon and Paul Greengrass coming back, they know what they're doing. They hit on a lot of like the things that make it great. They have great chase sequences. They do have some sort of like, a lot of, cloak and dagger, a lot of double talk, a lot of people not knowing what's going on, and it all kind of revolving around him. But it just didn't have quite the same essence and the same vibe and the same, feel that you got from the original 3, and it felt kind of tacked on. And I think they tried really hard, and it's not that they didn't try their best, but that then was one of those first times that I realized maybe this was better just leaving at the 3. That was one of the first times I realized this idea of continuing on might not be the best thing. And as much as I would want to see them again and have that team up because they did so well, it doesn't always mean that it's going to translate into a great movie.
Well, it's hard. It's really, really hard. Like, once you complete a story, to kind of be like, oh, here's a thread that you didn't realize was dangling that actually is a whole other thing that, is this it's like with everything you do when you're like writing a story, it's like you have to have this law of unintended consequences constantly like running in the background and being like, well, yeah, everything got like taken care of, except when you did this thing, this created this other problem that now you have to deal with, and then you have to like go after that. So the best ones do that, and I was trying to think of a series that actually pulled that off, and I really like the Rocky with Creed was the only one that I could kind of like think of that was like, that's really a one where there were unintended, like we got the end of that story where Rocky defeats Clubber Lang, but you don't like we're now getting to understand what happened when Clubber Lang killed Apollo Creed, like how that rippled through time, and it now becomes Rocky's problem again, you know. And I think that's, and they were able to do a lot of great things with it, but that's the thing that's ultra challenging, especially because when you think of writing like that first part of something that you don't know is going to be a trilogy, the idea to like wrap everything up and make sure there is no like leftover threads is
that idea of a thread left that you might not have even really noticed it, and then you kind of retcon it in to continue on a story. I'm fine with that. It's a very hard thing to do, and like you said, I don't think many stories do it well, because I remember one of the worst ones was The Hangover 3, where they made a whole movie out of just some offhanded comment from somebody, I think from Black Doug, and then they just decided, oh, that nugget of that guy that he mentioned, we're going to make a whole story and somehow bring it all back around that it involves all them. And I was just like, oh, really? I was like, again, it's like, you guys are, that's sometimes too, then you overthink it and you really try to get too clever about it, where it's like, that's where you just stick to the basics, man. Just stick to them going to another location for somebody's bachelor party or something like that, and shenanigans and hijinks ensue. But just then be clever about like the execution of that aspect of it. Like what is, keep upping the stakes of like the party or something like that. Like, I always thought the best way Hangover could have made a better trilogy was if they did Vegas, then they did something like do another one that's maybe offbeat, like Nashville's like a great party town or another great party town, and then do like New Orleans as kind of capping it off and like elevating like each party scene as something big happens. And I know you gotta get over the thing of like those three just being together all the time. Somehow I think that's where you got to change it up a little bit. Maybe Doug does get included in the shenanigans or something like that, but stick to the basics though of what the basic essence of the story is. And I think that's the same thing. That's me where I get really thrown off when the essence gets off. And watch The Matrix. I'm curious about just your take on the tone and the style that they do. Okay. And again, reading it way she kind of looks at it, it's kind of for the better, and it's part, and it looks like it's intentional, but I don't know again if I personally enjoy the intention and where they went with the style and actual visual way they presented the movie. But again, I'm curious how you interpret that, because there's a lot going on in Matrix 4.
I will say this, after reading, the Emily St. James article, it did make me really, really interested to watch the Matrix Resurrection. She really does do a nice job in pointing out how she feels they realistically dealt with a character's trauma and past trauma and trying to deal with trauma through a very specific
from her framing
style. Yeah, and I was like, oh, that makes me really interested to see how they do it. So I will see it, and it's no small part because of this article. So kudos to you, Emily. I'm sure a friend of the podcast. No.
Oh yeah, well she's a friend of the pod, sure. She's gonna get some mention in her Twitter feed and be like, "You were mentioned." I was aware. Who? What? But yeah, no, she does a very good job, and like I said, that's why I appreciate her takes, because she does some very thoughtful takes and really dives into some nuance. Now, whether again, that's sometimes that thing of like, is somebody really just creating a whole cloth like nuance thing just out of the way they interpret it, whether that's actually the intentions of the filmmaker is always an open question. But she does do a thoughtful, nuanced take on trauma, and especially with the Matrix, and actually how interpreting sometimes one thing may seem a certain way, but actually then the full scope of it, actually she ends up feeling it a different way. So it was all very good. I just want to kind of maybe end with this, just like with all these kind of ideas, with these franchises being extended and people still watching them, do you see this as do people want the familiar, or is this sort of a chicken and an egg situation where we don't know what we don't have? And like, that's more original stories where they're kind of just keep getting fed the common characters that they're familiar with. And that's then kind of what they gravitate to, because it's sort of what's available. They do feel comfortable about it, and that's what they do want. Or is it just that then not having anything as many new, fresh stories with interesting characters, they keep going to that? You know what I mean? It's not we're not going to solve this question. I'm just curious about how you feel about that, because I sometimes feel this is it's self-perpetuating cycle though with these franchises, where we don't give up on these characters because the studios don't let them, but on the other side too, we don't let the studios give up on these characters. Like,
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Here's my take on the is kind
hoping this can wrap up this whole sort of segment, but we'll see.
My take on it is like this. Yes, you're right. We don't know what we don't know. So like this idea that we should have all these like great original things is a great idea, and it's wonderful. And that's basically born out of people looking at past things and are like, oh, hey, they were coming up with like this then and this then and this then and this then and whatever. Well, I think of it very much like music. Like there'll be people who like love 70s music, and they'll point to all the hits of the 70s and they'll be like, this was amazing, this was amazing. And like never point at like all the crappy music that came out in the 70s. And like the same thing with the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and 2010s. Like everybody looks back and they're like, this was amazing. And they just talk about all the hits that happened. It's like, it's not that people aren't doing original movies. And it's not that original movies aren't still happening. The problem is, like, yes, they may not be happening as much, but the ones that like are continuing the series, like this Marvel Cinematic Universe has become this like amazing thing that has like spawned so many amazing characters that I didn't know anything about Iron Man or really cared that much about Spider-Man. Like, and now this is this whole thing. And there's along the way, there's some original stuff that is getting popped up, but like some of it isn't very good. And that's okay. We should be investing in stuff that isn't, but between Netflix and Hulu and Apple and everybody trying to get content out there, there's a lot of stuff. And some of it is very, very bad. And that's fine. But I don't think it's this thing where we should look back and be like, oh, everybody's like, we just need that new thing. And it's like, yeah, when the new thing comes, people are going to watch it and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that was amazing. Right. We need more of that thing. We want that to be more. And that'll just naturally happen, is my feeling on the whole thing. So it's not that Hollywood is out of ideas. It's just, you know, when good ideas come, they'll perpetuate things. Nobody anticipated Fast and the Furious when it came out, and now look at it. It's one of the greatest movie franchises of all time. Why it hasn't won an Academy Award is beyond me, but we'll keep pushing that fight.
Yeah, well, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think I do agree. This DC universe, they just keep weaving out all these characters that I would never have known about, and I end up loving them more than the actual main story characters that are in all their film franchises. So you pretty much just double down on all that. And so I can't argue with that, Tony. So
yeah, but does that count as original or not original? Like, I think these are very original for stuff that like is properties that already exist, right? Like, it's weird.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, because there's always a bit of me in that I'm either a contrarian or I'm a nostalgic person a lot of times, where either whatever's kind of like the main trend and people are doing a lot of, I always like to think of like, well, what's like the opposite of this, or what's something different than this? That's probably what's actually kind of cool and get ahead of the curve or something. I'm very much like that. I always want to be like that, but I'm aware of that. So I also now kind of pull back from that a little bit. The other thing is the nostalgic thing of like, oh, wasn't it so cool in the 90s when they have all these spec scripts and all these just original stories? And it is cool and it was great, but that's just not the time we're in right now. And I do then realize where we are right now. We're in the middle of the biggest parts of it are these big wielding universes with these new characters that keep coming out, and they do, like I said, I appreciate what Marvel's doing. Like, it is impressive, and I was originally a Marvel hater, but I can't anymore because of what they're outputting is actually pretty good stuff, like and new things and new characters that and I said this earlier, I've never been aware of, don't care about, but now I am caring about them because they're making actually good stories around them and interesting stories. And like I said with this Peacemaker, it's DC, but it was an interesting arc, and I really just enjoyed it, and it was about friendship and trust and all like different things, and it just was really good and it was touching. And I said this about WandaVision when I talked about it the other week, another one that great arc, great characters that were secondary characters in a franchise, and they are now giving them fuller layers and fleshing them out, and I'm finding connection with them. So it's pretty wild right now, but we are getting great stories. It's just in a different concept of how versus traditionally we got our new characters and new stories.
Yeah. I that's a great way to sum it all up, for sure. We solved it. There it is. That's
the end.
Print
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I knew we could do it, Tony. I knew we could do it. No, what we did do. We came in under 2 hours is what we did. There we go.
Yeah.
So, all right, but
shortest episodes.
Before we leave, do you have a spotlight that you have? Anything you wanted to highlight?
I mean, I definitely would highlight, going back to the beginning, the Everyday app on your phone. Cool. It's a very simple app. It's just called Everyday, and it's very much like a little bit of a checklist. I don't know how to pronounce the creator's name, but
I looked it up, and I'll have a link in the show notes. It's funny, when you mentioned it earlier, I thought it was an app that I might have already tried. I looked it up and I haven't, but I did look at it, and it gets 4.7 stars out of 5 rating. So it's obviously a very popular app, and I think you can even try it for free before you do an in-app purchase, I guess, to unlock other stuff. But yeah, I definitely see it as like one of those more habit trackers, right? To see your streaks and how often you're doing certain certain motivations and habits and stuff like that, which is always a great way to start.
Oh no, it's great. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's very simple. I appreciate it. The person who developed the app responds very quickly if you have comments or like features that you think it should have. She responds very quickly. So I'm a fan.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, right here on the second tile of explaining what it is, it says don't break the chain. So it's very much the method of just keep doing it, the same thing every day. Yeah. I apply that to my writing. I don't do as much of the streak stuff. I do it with meditating, writing, stretching, and there's one other thing I kind of check my streaks on, but I don't go religiously on it outside of the writing. Writing's the only thing that I literally have to check off every day. Everything else is just kind of seeing how often I do something and trying to be aware of it. That's where it helps me. So
yeah, my top 4 things are the ones that I try and do every day, which is exercise, meditate, write, music, and then I have it down as food, but it's just eating well, eating correct. You know what I mean? Not
writing music, huh? That's one of your top 4. Very cool. I didn't.
Okay. Yeah, music, just practicing, just getting on the piano, getting on the I try.
Good for you. See, I told you, the Renaissance, Anthony Hudak's Renaissance man.
Yeah, right. Terrible at everything,
but he does it all.
But
he's
it all.
Standard. He doesn't do anything great, but he can do it all. So that's great. So the Everyday app, that'll be in there. That's a great way to kickstart some habits. I'll also tie it back around to what we were talking about earlier. I am using the app Letterboxd to track my movies. That is now what I'm using to track my movies. It's a pretty popular one. It's been around. I've known about it for a couple years now, and I was using just a spreadsheet to track my movies that I watch. But I decided this year I was going to use Letterboxd and give that a try and see how that goes, and if that changes anything. I'm enjoying it. It's pretty well designed. It's pretty easy to just track, and then it's kind of also it's a journal where you can track what movies you watch, and then you can add in sort of comments or opinions, that go along with it, and you can rate it on a star rating up to 5 stars. You can say if you've watched it before, if it's kind of a rewatch, and then you can post whatever you write about it on it like publicly, and then it's also like a kind of a film community where you can follow people or brands that have films, and you can then, I guess, see what's trending, what's popular. Then you can read reviews from other people of what they said the movie, what they thought about the movie, that kind of stuff. So then it's also like a film community, like a social network, more or less, a community. It's a social.
Oh, yes. Letterboxd.
XD.
So it's
yes, that is right. It's Letterboxd.
Okay.
They dropped the E in the ED of boxed.
Yeah, that's very, very.
Yes. Oh yeah. Got to drop either that vowel at the end. The flickers, the
drop them vowels.
All those kind. So yeah, but it's great. I'm hoping that basically the biggest thing for me is I'm hoping at the end of the year it'll be one of those things where I can spit out a bunch of stats about like what I watched, what days I watched the most movies, that kind of stuff, and just somehow I think they do one of a year in review, kind of package it all up of what you watched. So I'm looking forward mostly to that and any of the stats that I can get out of it. So I can go back and add in movies that I watched. So I might do that, but that's a bigger undertaking that I haven't really set aside time or priority on my list to do. But going forward, I'm going to be using it for the time being. So it's a good app. So that'll be in the show notes as well. That's a fun way to track. So Tony, very well at tying it all back around. Again, 2 weeks in a row, 2 shows in a row of tying it back around into our opening topic discussion. So well done. All right. Well, do you have anything else? All right. Well, Tony, okay. I don't have anything else. So great episode. Great talk. Thanks for all the wonderful advice and guidance as my muse and well, not as my muse, as what my creative therapist, I guess we'll call you. All right, man. I'll check you next time, Tony.
All right.
Later.
Have a good one. ETI After Dark. No, I'm actually, as we're doing this, signing up for.
Awesome. I'm not following anybody. I got to follow somebody, so I have a friend on here now. Excellent.
Yeah, you'll know me.
Hootster. Oh, Hootster. Excellent. I really hope that becomes your handle now. That'll just be great.
That'll be my handle for this. It was available. Hootster was available.
That's great.
Look, I'm going to save my login here, so there it is. So you look for me.
Hootster. All right. And anybody else wants to see what Tony's watching, sign up for the Hootster. What is, let's see, what is my
What is yours?
handle?
Let's do this. This is the compelling stuff people tune in for.
Well, you see, now if we become popular enough and we can start charging for our show, you charge for the after show. This is what all the podcasts are doing now. They're like, well, it'll be ETI plus, entertaining the idea plus, and then we add you get a post show where we just kind of have these more random conversations about, well, what is my handle on my Letterboxd account? Let me go into the settings. J-Stravs. That's
ETI After Dark.
See, that's the original. See, that's what we come here for.
Wait, what? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. You can put your favorite films, like your top 4 favorite films. You can write a little bio on yourself. Okay. You can put your location. So that's cool stuff. It's just another social network. It's just centered around the love of film. So it's fun.